Hello and welcome to the webinar, It's Personal, the Next Big Focus in Food. My name is Josh Haslam, analyst here at Lux Research, and I'll be moderating today's session. Our speaker today will be Tommy Hayes, Research Associate at Lux Research. Throughout the webinar, you can type any questions you have in the Q&A box on your screen. Time permitting, we will answer all of the questions that we can. If your question does not get answered, please do not hesitate to email it to us at questions@luxresearchinc.com and we will respond via email. All attendee phones are on mute to minimize background noise. At this point, I'd like to introduce Lux Research's Tommy Hayes.
Thank you, Josh, for the warm introduction. So today I'm going to be talking about personalized nutrition, something I'm sure you all have at least heard of. But before I really dive into today's content, I do want to level set, just make sure that we're all speaking the same language. So when I say personalized nutrition, I'm talking about the sciences, the technologies, the products, and the services that provide consumers with individualized dietary recommendations. So very much going away from the antiquated food pyramid and really moving towards this N is equal to 1 type approach. So what aspects around personalized nutrition will I be talking about today? So I'm going to be talking about 3 things related to personalized nutrition. First, I'm going to be talking about what's driving the need for personalized nutrition. Then going to look at the enabling sensing and diagnostic technologies that are helping fuel some of these personalized recommendations and look at what are the gaps and opportunity areas related to that. And then lastly, going to explore high potential business models that can really help translate personalized nutrition to a substantial business opportunity. So first, what's driving the need for personalized nutrition? So let's take a look at some data. And that data is the prevalence of certain chronic diseases around the globe in the year 2016. For diabetes, it was 383 million people. For coronary artery disease, another 154 million people. And for hypertensive heart disease, 17 million people, adding up to a whopping 554 million people. Now, what's the common thread between all of these? They're all largely preventable by diet. And let's take an even deeper look into that top line item, diabetes, which is the most prevalent of the 3. Where we've seen that prevalence increase in every region of the world around for the past 30 some odd years. That's absolutely staggering. And if we don't do anything differently, that trend will continue. And to add insult to injury, not only are people becoming more affected by this disease, the cost of care is also increasing. We've seen over a 2x jump in the cost of care premium compared to those without diabetes. Now, why is this happening? So our hypothesis is that it's because we live in a world today where you're now having food really serving for indulgence, which can attribute to the rise in prevalence of these diseases. And then you also have drugs, which are serving for disease treatment, which can attribute to the rising cost of care for these diseases. But there is an emerging opportunity along this kind of middle of what you could call a spectrum, where you could reverse this trend through personalized nutrition, where you can use personalized nutrition for disease prevention, because as I said, these diseases are all largely preventable by diet. And this can really help shift the healthcare paradigm from disease treatment to disease prevention, really go from reactive to proactive. Now, let's think about this concept a little bit further in terms of what's the actual size of the market opportunity look like. So let's just run through kind of a quick hypothetical scenario to give us a feel for that. So continuing along the example of diabetes, we'll use the number of diabetics as a proxy for the number of pre-diabetics, so 383 million. Let's say that you were able to deliver a personalized nutrition solution to 30% of that population and able to obtain an average of a customer lifetime value of $200. That's going to calculate to a $15 billion opportunity that is largely untapped today. And that could only be bigger if you include other disease use cases. So once again, going along this use case of diabetes, if we look at some of the recent investments and acquisitions and partnerships into diabetes prevention and management, it's all largely skewed towards management. And yes, that is certainly important too. And the diabetes management is serving a separate unmet need. But what I'm trying to drive home is that the diabetes prevention aspect and disease prevention aspect is largely untapped. So I've hopefully sold you on kind of the concept of using personalized nutrition as a mechanism for disease prevention, and that opportunity has largely been unexplored. But we have to remember that before engaging with and investing in personalized nutrition, we have to remember that it's still a diet. And it's very important to think about it in that context, because many diets have come and gone and been dubbed the term fad diet. And one of the primary reasons that these fad diets failed is because they did not stand on credible science. So it's absolutely paramount that as we look to use personalized nutrition as a disease prevention mechanism, we have to have a firm understanding of what credible scientific tools are at our disposal and where the current gaps are. Or else, personalized nutrition is simply just not going to succeed as a disease prevention tool, and it will just become another fad diet. So when I was talking just a second ago about the scientific tools at our disposal for personalized nutrition, I was really referring to sensing and diagnostic technologies. So that's where I would like to focus now, so that we can walk away with a clear understanding on what sensing and diagnostic tools you need to construct a successful personalized nutrition solution for disease prevention. So it can be a whole gamut of kind of different data sources that are generated by sensing and diagnostic tools to help fuel these personalized recommendations. So first, it can be very rudimentary data type, physical trait and lifestyle, which could actually just be manually inputted by a user, like height, weight, but it also could be physical activity from a device like a Fitbit, where usually you're using kind of established data trends to make recommendations. And then it could also be biomarkers, which a lot of the times is going to come from blood. And you're usually measuring different levels of certain nutrients like vitamins, minerals, or perhaps things like blood pressure. And then moving further along, you can use genetic data, so essentially our hereditary makeup. So often that can just be obtained from a saliva sample, and then you're using a high throughput DNA sequencing technique. And then lastly, the microbiome. So typically it comes from a stool sample, and you're using, once again, either a high throughput DNA sequencing technique, looking for marker genes, or a metagenomic approach. And this can become a lot more complicated. It's something actually we're going to look into for a later report. But I just wanted to highlight some of the key use cases or the key tools within the science and diagnostic toolbox. And so what does this ultimately arrive at? All these different forms of types of recommendations that you can make in the context of personalized nutrition. So this can be healthy meal plans, recommend supplements, give nutrition and lifestyle advice, or even give ways to decrease diabetes risk. So going back to that personalized nutrition theme, or excuse me, disease prevention theme. So I do want to look at what I have here at the top, the data types, through a slightly different lens, because the personalized nutrition solutions out there, they don't just vary by data type. They also vary by frequency of recommendations, which really speaks to how often is the testing being done and how often are the recommendations being refined. So it can be fixed, where you're simply giving it's a one-time test with a one-time set of recommendations being made, or it could be repeat. Perhaps you're doing testing on a monthly cadence, and then each time the recommendations are refined, and changes in certain, say, biomarkers are reported. And then lastly, it could be continuous, where you have a nonstop stream of data being generated, analyzed, and contextualized to give recommendations on an ongoing basis. So if we populate this framework here with a representative list of companies in the personalized nutrition space, we see that it is becoming fairly crowded. But there are a couple blank spots in this figure, and that was done deliberately. So first, to point out, there's two areas that really just aren't applicable. So that's fixed recommendations for physical traits and lifestyle, because there's just no meaningful recommendations that you can make based off that. And then secondly, for genetics, because our genetics are fixed inherently, they don't change over time, so there's no need to do continuous or even repeat testing for that. But it's this last blank spot that I really want to call out, and that's continuous monitoring of the microbiome. And this is really the only space within personalized nutrition that is essentially untouched. And so that's where we're really going to focus on today. And not only do we want to highlight it because this area is essentially untouched, but our take is that the microbiome, and especially continuous microbiome monitoring, is absolutely essential for long-term success in personalized nutrition. And our justification for that is for two reasons. The first is that, one, our microbiomes change throughout the day. So the microbial populations within our gut are in constant flux. And then secondly, and this is, I would say, even more important, and going back to the disease prevention theme, imbalances in our microbiomes are linked to disease states. So if we think about really the global population, people can fall within three categories, although the lines are certainly blurred between these: healthy, pre-disease, and then disease. So for healthy individuals, fixed or repeat solutions, that's going to be sufficient. But when we think more about people that are within a pre-disease state or a disease state, continuous recommendations would be a very, very powerful tool for disease prevention and disease management. Because as we see here, as I mentioned before, imbalances in microbial populations within the gut are linked to disease states. So this table here is some examples of the observed imbalances in the microbiome that are linked to disease states that are largely preventable by diet. So you could actually envision a scenario where you have a continuous microbiome monitor that actually looks at these microbial populations and gives recommendations on certain foods to eat or lifestyle changes to make to alter the microbial population back towards a healthy state. So now let's actually go ahead and expand upon what methods are out there to analyze one's gut microbiome. And we're going to look at ways to do this even just outside the context of personalized nutrition, so we can really look at a full survey of the tools out there for the microbiome. So the first is genomic methods, and as we can see just by the sheer number of logos, this is predominantly the way today that our gut microbiome is analyzed. Where, as I had mentioned before, you're taking a stool sample and then you're usually looking for a certain marker gene, or you could do a kind of a whole genome sequencing approach. And then we have microbiology methods. This, though, is not largely applicable to personalized nutrition and for analysis of the gut microbiome, because a lot of the cells today that are in our gut are not reproducible in laboratory conditions, so it's largely not applicable. And then we have gas analysis, where you're actually looking at the production of certain volatile compounds made from the gut, such as hydrogen, carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, and using that as an indirect way to get a feel for the status of one's gut microbiome. And then lastly, you have metabolomic analysis, where you're looking at secondary metabolites that are secreted by the gut, such as short-chain fatty acids, and once again, using that as an indirect way to assess one's gut microbiome status. Although the consensus is that there's really no clear correlation between these secondary metabolites and the microbiome, but it could be a powerful tool further down the road. But what I really want to highlight, once again, is the product development opportunity within continuous microbiome monitoring. So we've only come across one company that's looking to do this, and it's very, very early stage. It actually just spun out of a university in Australia. So I really want to drive home that this is really the way to differentiate and personalize nutrition. Now, I've kind of walked through all the different sensing and diagnostic tools and really talked a lot about the ways that you can assess particularly the microbiome. But I was actually having a conversation with a client looking at a very similar version of this figure. And this is all, the comment was, "This is all great, Tommy, but how are companies actually monetizing off this data? What's the actual business model that these companies are using to kind of leverage convert microbiome data to revenue?" So that's a conversation that I really want to have with all of you, and look at what are the business models today, and then really think about what are some business models later on down the road that we could bring into personalized nutrition to really unlock it as a disease prevention tool. So looking at how companies today, continuing along this conversation of microbiome analysis, what are the revenue sources for them? So it really falls into three areas. So the first one is sales of testing devices. So where these microbiome analysis companies are selling an actual sensing or diagnostic tool to either a consumer or a business. And then secondly, we have analysis services. So, and this is where we see in the context of business to consumer, which is really related to personalized nutrition, where you're using that data set from microbiome, analyzing the microbiome, the stool sample, what have you, and then creating personalized nutrition recommendations. Now, for business to business, this is really used as a way for drug discovery, so like finding bugs as drugs, where companies will usually identify candidates and then form licensing arrangements or partnerships to commercialize those bugs as drugs. And then also offering testing services. So they're actually charging their clients based on the number of tests for microbiome analysis. And then the last one is actually sales of other products. So you're actually seeing a fair number of these companies pair their personalized nutrition recommendations with tangible products, such as prebiotics and probiotics, or their other supplements such as vitamins, minerals, omega-3, what have you. And then in the business-to-business context for therapeutics, similar to what you see under analysis services for business-to-business, sometimes companies are actually identifying the bug as a drug and then taking it upon themselves to commercialize that. So populating the logos that I had shown before for microbiome analysis and then inserting them here, what I really want to focus on is the business to consumer context, because as I said, this is really what is analogous to the revenue schemes for all of personalized nutrition. Now, we've talked about, what are the means in which these companies are generating revenue, but how much does it actually cost to the consumer? That's another really, really important question, because it's crucial that in order for personalized nutrition to be successful as a disease prevention tool, it needs to be affordable and accessible to people. So now, if we look at the original figure that I had showed, explaining the overall personalized nutrition space, and if we took a look at minimum cost for one-time tests, these are all in the order of hundreds of dollars, and that's hundreds of dollars out of pocket from the consumer. And if we even see the microbiome ones are more expensive. So once again, going back to, okay, how do we move the cost off the consumer so that it can really become a disease prevention tool? Because people that are especially in a healthy or pre-disease state aren't likely to make this expensive purchase. So one way forward is value-based pricing. So I showed the business models that are being used, and really can be distilled down to these companies, personalized nutrition companies, they're operating on a single transaction basis or a subscription basis, and getting that money once again from the consumer. But another business model that could really make an impact is value-based pricing, where you're charging your customer, whether that be a consumer or any other entity, solely based on the effectiveness of the service. So this could be a really way to incentivize employers and health insurers to get involved with personalized nutrition. And I'll walk through a couple examples of companies to hopefully make it more concrete on how value-based pricing works and how it can make an impact on personalized nutrition. So one company is Omada Health, which is really on the fringe of the personalized nutrition arena. So they offer a digital health program for diabetes prevention, where it's charging its customer base, which is employers and health insurers, solely based on the percentage of weight loss by users. So once again, solely based on the effectiveness of its service. And then another company that's actually totally unrelated to personalized nutrition, but we can still learn a lot from, and there's other examples too that we could go through, is a company called Konix, where it's offering a predictive maintenance solution for railway assets, and it's charging its customer base, railway operators, solely based on the percentage of annual savings per asset. And this company had actually switched from a subscription model to value-based pricing and saw a lot of success after that switch. And these aren't just random companies. These are companies that we've talked to, are at scale, and have given a Lux take of positive. So what am I trying to get at here? What I'm trying to get at here is that value-based pricing can really create incentive for those that bear the financial burden of care to adopt preventive tools like personalized nutrition. Once again, really going from that reactive to proactive mindset. Okay, so I realize I've gone through a lot. Just want to end with some key takeaways. So the first is leverage personalized nutrition as a disease prevention tool. One, for just philosophical reasons, but two, for business opportunity reasons. And the fact that there's a double-digit billion-dollar opportunity out there, largely untapped. Then two is seize the only remaining white space within this increasingly crowded personalized nutrition arena, which is continuous microbiome analysis. And once again, that's really going to be a powerful tool for long-term success when we look at personalized nutrition as a disease prevention tool. And then lastly, to really remove the cost off the consumer and get parties involved that bear the cost of care, is to implement value-based pricing schemes to push towards a reimbursable model.
Wow, Tommy. Thanks for that engaging and informative webinar. What we're now going to do is take your questions, which you can type into the Q&A box on your screen. Please don't use the chat box for questions. If we don't get to your question during this call, what we'd like you to do is contact questions@luxresearchinc.com after the webinar, and we'll route your question appropriately. So now let's see what we have coming in here. And it looks like I have a couple questions. First, Tommy, do you see personalized diet companies going direct to consumers or through healthcare providers?
Yeah, that's a good one. So looking at a lot of the companies that we've talked to and have read about elsewhere. A lot of them are going direct to consumer right now, which I understand why initially they might be doing that, because they do have, it's the convenience factor, being able to send a testing kit or a recommendation set right to the consumer's home or email or what have you. There are early signals that some companies are transitioning to channeling their product, their solution through a healthcare practitioner. So like Nutrigenomics is one company doing that. Day 2 is a company that probably a lot of people know about on the phone, but they actually made the switch going from direct to consumer to healthcare practitioner. And I think actually, especially as we look at making personalized nutrition as a disease prevention tool and make it go from a nice to have to a need to have, I really think it's going to be important to have more of those companies go through the healthcare practitioner. And especially when you think about one thing that we didn't really touch upon too much today is how important it is to provide guidance to the consumer to actually take this personalized recommendation set on what foods to eat, what supplements to eat, what have you, and actually incorporate that into their lifestyles to make a positive impact. So I think by having the healthcare practitioner involved, whether that be a doctor, a dietitian, they can be people to really help implement those changes for the user.
Mm-hmm. Great. And it looks like we do have a number more questions, so you've prompted many to get their minds moving, which is great to see. And so along these lines, I think, when we start to think about these personal diet companies, question that I see sort of resounding with the questions I'm seeing is what types of technology can enable the development of these continuous microbiome monitoring devices?
Yeah, sure. So, like I pointed out, there's only one company that we've come across that's doing this, Atmo Biosciences, which I think I mentioned just spun out of a university in Australia recently. So the way that they're doing it is they essentially have an ingestible capsule that then resides within your digestive tract, within your gut, and is actually measuring certain volatile compounds. The ones that they've tested so far were just hydrogen, be oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then they're looking to incorporate other volatile compounds. And then that sensor is hooked up to, it could be hooked up to your mobile phone, and then is giving certain recommendations based off that. Of course, there are limitations in terms of you have to think about the battery lifespan of that. You have to think about kind of the ick factor of swallowing this capsule too. But the kind of outside of Atmo Biosciences, other things that we've thought about, and actually a conversation I had with some people at a conference, half jokingly, half seriously, is you can think about a smart toilet, which is kind of an out there idea, but actually could be something really valuable. You think about every time we go to the bathroom, that's data that we're just flushing down the toilet. Seriously, and it's asking a consumer or user or whoever it is to deviate from their normal behavior. And sensors are only getting smaller and cheaper, so you could actually imagine that being incorporated into the toilet and then have that connected to your phone or whatever. So I realize it's a little bit of an out there concept, but it could be legitimate.
It is, but the fringe is very important to understand.
Yeah, and I realize it's not truly continuous, but but it's very, very close.
Right. So speaking of the fringe, when we think about microbiome approaches, and you were talking earlier about maybe the scientific proof to go with some of these, how do you see the role of scientific evidence backing some of these analyses for future market adoption? Do you think that's going to be a very valuable portion of what's going to adopt, or as consumers, are they just ready to adopt? What do you think is?
Yeah, so it's an also good question. Because what I want to emphasize from what I said before is that there's a lot of data, correlative data, but not necessarily causation data.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we still certainly need to bridge a gap in showing exactly what types of foods, what type of supplements do we need to be taking to make an imbalanced gut microbiota profile into a balanced one. So that is certainly the goal, but there is still some fundamental science that needs to be validated to make that happen.
Great. Let's see. I think we have a few more. They just keep coming in, which is great. So as sort of a final question in this case, perhaps, how do you assess the scalability of some of these personal nutrition startups, their solutions to getting into this and maybe working with other companies?
Yeah. So it's one thing we've talked a lot about with clients. Because you see a lot of these companies, they're software companies. And those can scale very quickly, at least initially, but you run the risk of really fading off down the road, because I touched on consumer guidance, right? If you're just a software company where you're just sending someone personalized dietary recommendations to their email inbox, you're really trusting that consumer to actually ingest all that data and then act upon it. Now, you could make a trade-off in terms of potential scalability by not just being a software company, by coupling it with an actual tangible product, say a prebiotic, a probiotic, or actual food, meal kits, whatever. And I actually think that's a really necessary trade-off. Because, like I said, I think the consumer guidance piece is absolutely critical. So I think it's important to take somewhat of a hit on potential scalability and go from not just a software company, but you're marrying a software, based personalized recommendation with an actual tangible product. Yeah.
Great.
So that the consumer actually consume it.
Right. I think that's a great place to end on. Consumers consuming what we're providing.
Yeah.
That's a great place to end on. So, I would like to thank everybody for providing their questions. We had a great little discussion here. And of course, thank you, Tommy, for that engaging webinar today. If we didn't answer your question today during the webinar, someone from Lux will be in touch with you shortly. We'll be sure to get to all of these questions so that you can have the responses that are most interest to you. But for now, that includes our webinar for today. The slide presentation and recordings from this webinar will be sent to all attendees via email. And once again, if you have any questions, please email them. And thank you again for attending our webinar today.